Meanwhile, let's talk about these disability assessments. If you turn on a TV or you open a tabloid newspaper, it won't take you long to find a story about so-called benefit cheats, people who trick the state into giving them money by lying about having a disability. Classic one where somebody says they can't walk and they're filmed somewhere having a huge Strictly style dance. Then there are programs, Undercover Benefits Cheat, Saints and Scroungers, famously Benefits Street. Do you remember that one? Politicians want to be seen to get tough as well. In 2014, when he was Work and Pensions Secretary, Ian Duncan Smith said the government would, I quote, root out the benefits cheats who've pretended to be ill for money. Since then, there have been a number of welfare reforms designed to make it harder to claim state aid. Okay, fine. Everyone focuses on the small number of fraudsters, but maybe we're missing the real headline when we do that. Since 2013, more than 17,000 ill and disabled people have died while waiting to hear whether they've actually passed the claim for disability benefit. So that's thousands of the most vulnerable in our society dying before they receive the money that they are entitled to. In fact, things are so bad that a United Nations report said the conditions for disabled people were tantamount to human catastrophe. And yes, they were referring to Britain. So my next guest has spent the last 2 years speaking to disabled people up and down the country. They've said it's becoming more and more difficult to get help because society is so suspicious of anyone who asks for money. Frances Ryan is a wheelchair user herself and has just undergone what she calls an invasive assessment to get the money she needs. So, hi Frances, first of all, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks.
Could I ask you just to tell us about the assessment that you went through yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm a wheelchair user. I have a genetic muscle weakness. And I've received what used to be called disability living allowance, which was the old benefit that paid for the extra cost of disability, like extra heating and buying a wheelchair. And like many people, I was given what they call an indefinite award when I was a teenager, which meant that was because my condition was genetic, there was no point in assessing me again, and I could have that benefit as security for a number of decades. But when the welfare reformers came in, it was swapped to a different benefit that was brought in supposedly, as you say, to be tougher, to supposedly catch these people who were supposedly facing their disabilities. And that meant that every person who was formerly on disability living allowance had to be retested and put through an assessment for the government's so-called new, tougher benefits.
And so you had to do that yourself? You had to be retested, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, it was ironic, really. I'd spent 2 years researching this book called Crippled, which looks at the impact of cuts on disabled people. And then just after I finished writing that, I went through the assessment myself. And, it was, of course, it was difficult, it was invasive. But I think, for me, I was in a decent position. I had some financial security. I could advocate for myself. But many, many people going through this don't have that. I've spoken to disabled people who are bedbound. They're so ill they can't get out of bed, who are nonetheless put through these assessments. But literally an assessor coming to their home, sitting by their bed and asking them questions about how ill they were. I was talking to agoraphobics who had to go on a bus for 20 miles to get to an assessment centre, despite the fact that they're so anxious they can't leave the house. This is a widespread issue affecting hundreds of thousands of disabled and severely ill people in this country who are having to go through this very much behind closed doors just because they are asking the state for help in times of need.
You mentioned your book, which is called Crippled, Austerity and the Demonisation of Disabled People. You go in the beginning about the politics of it and how exercised the government has been about making sure that people who are bogus, so-called, don't get money. So Esther McVey saying in the Mail in 2013 she was going after the bogus disabled. George Freeman, who was Theresa May's policy chief, saying disability benefits should go to the really disabled. That kind of talk can really upset people, can it?
Yeah, that has been a huge issue. The policies, of course, are the central issue, but we have to look and say at what led these policies to be developed in the first place. And absolutely, there is this idea that official figures for benefit fraud, have stayed barely 1%. It's an incredibly low fraud rate. And yet, ministers use language, certain parts of the press use language to create this false idea that there are huge numbers of disabled people who are faking their disabilities, when statistically we know this simply isn't true. And that has created a culture of suspicion and, I think, demonisation of people who are just normal, everyday people who have just had the bad luck of falling ill or disabled and who need help. And that has led to a system of benefit assessment that is, I think, coming from the perspective that people are lying, that they are trying to milk the system. And that is a really, really toxic sort of narrative to build a system of what should be humane and competent and fair. And we know that that just isn't happening in this country anymore.
You have some amazing pen portraits of people with disabilities, and I'm just going to mention one in particular, Robert in Brighton, and he's 34. He had a very active life. Keane Gartner, used to go to the gym, used to go dancing, had an interior design company as well as the gardening, and then he got a neurological disease, and he's now almost completely paralysed apart from his lower left arm. And when the state comes to help him, they've somehow put him in an attic flat.
I think that's a really central thing with the cuts to disability support in this country. The disability benefit system is a really major part, but it's connected to other things. It's connected to, the reduction in social care that means disabled people often no longer have the support to get dressed in the morning or leave the house. It's
Tell us a bit.
Cases like Robert, who, due to lack of social housing and accessible social housing, thousands of disabled people like Robert are having to live in conditions in their homes where, they can't access the toilet, so they're having to urinate in bottles. And these issues connect. They are various parts of inequality towards disabled people, various bits of cost-cutting that all interplay and connect to lead a number of disabled people living in, conditions that we wouldn't wish on our worst enemy.
And just on Robert, because I was just fascinated by your description, he's in this attic flat. He really is almost completely disabled apart from one arm. So how does he live his life? What happens?
So Robert, I think, was one example of a combination of how a lack of accessible housing, and also Robert doesn't have enough social care hours. And that's just really insight into it. It's not just his disability that is leaving him to be isolated and depressed and scared. It's the social factors. It's the fact that the local council doesn't have the money to provide him with enough, personal assistance to help him, get about. It's the fact that he's not in an accessible home with a lift, so he's able to get into his wheelchair and out of his home and into the street. Those things don't come from disability. I think sometimes we think of disability as inherently depressing and sad and difficult. And actually, a lot of the issues aren't to do with people's health. It's to do with the fact that as a society, we aren't providing enough support for people.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Frances Ryan, author of Crippled, Austerity and the Demonisation of Disabled People. Coming back to those tests, the tests you have to go through for benefits if you are disabled, and the way you feel, because of course the whole narrative that we hear is all about cheating, but for you it's real, it's what you need, but you can't convince them. Stuart Underwood in Oxford says, I'm an amputee below my left leg. I was awarded PIP, Personal Independence Payment, in Feb last year. I've been sent a renewal form and I now have to go through the same process again even though nothing has changed. This is degrading. The form is 24 pages long. It's too much. And if somebody's in a situation where they've had an amputation in their left leg, then you just think, well, that's not going to change itself, that situation. Stephen Bingham in Belfast says, I've got Crohn's disease, which we know is terrible, and severe arthritis. Around 2010, I attended a tribunal where my benefits were cut off, despite me being in and out of hospital. Luckily, I have got some legal experience, but for over a year, I was broke. Other people may not be in such a fortunate position. So trying to convince them you are disabled and how crazy this can get. Pam Johnson is in Newton Abbot in beautiful Devon. Hi, Pam.
Hi.
You've been on disability living allowance for a little while now.
Since about 2014. No, 2004.
2004, 15 years, okay. Can you give me a sense of what it's for, Pam, if you don't mind?
Well, when my daughter was born, I developed arthritis, and it just used to be everywhere in my body. And so I've had injections, and my hands are quite crooked now and lumpy. But my knees for a long while, I've had to have injections and things because
Gosh.
I'm having difficulty walking, and sometimes my legs give way.
And is that what they call rheumatoid arthritis? Is it that one?
I've got both rheumatoid and osteo.
Oh, poor you.
And yeah.
So when you go to the assessors, you say what you just said to me, but they don't just say, okay, fine. Is that right?
No, they've got a list of questions to ask, like, where did you park? And how long did it take you to walk here? And how fast did you walk? And I think, 30 miles an hour.
Well, what answers are they expecting?
Questions.
They are strange, because what's the point of where did you park? Is it, you say in the car park, do you, or what?
Well, they kept changing the venue for me to meet them, and they wanted me to meet them in Torquay on the main road, where there was about 3 spaces for disabled parkers, bus stops, and then loading bays, so there was nowhere to park.
And how many questions were there?
In the next street. Sorry.
Sorry, Pam. How many questions were there?
Oh, lots of
20?
questions. I was in there for about 3/4 of an hour or more.
And did you get then your benefits continued or not?
No, they took it off me.
Okay.
They said there was nothing wrong with me.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Suzanne is an assessor. Right, Suzanne, not your real name.
No.
I'm not blaming you for that one, but my goodness, you guys are tough.
No, we're not. I mean, whether you do PIP or you do employment and support allowance, we're all medical professionals. We don't make the decision, the DWP does. We advise them because they're not medical people. And people don't have to prove they have a disability when you're looking at something like employment and support allowance. They're not proving they have a disability. We have to advise on their function, and that's their function to work. And you can work, obviously, if you are a wheelchair user, etc.
Yeah, so if let's say a plumber comes to you and she's lost the use of her hand because of an accident, and she says, I can't be a plumber anymore, I want the benefit, you say you've still got the other hand and you can work in a call centre. Is that right?
No, I don't say that. What I say is I look at how they're functioning, and then I report on how they function, and then people can be retrained to do other things. That's down to the DWP. It's the government's criteria we work to. We're all medical professionals. We're not here to catch people out or say people don't have a condition. Ironically, I have PIP myself.
Okay, because you have a disability.
I have a disability myself. I don't work assessing PIP. I assess a different disability benefit. But, we're looking at whether someone can function, and it's not about whether they could do the job that they used to do. That's not how the DWP works. Unfortunately, the retraining side of things doesn't seem to happen, but that's another issue. They did change the criteria for PIP a while ago, and people did lose things like mobility vehicles, and I've seen people be at the receiving end of that, and to be honest, I didn't feel that was a fair thing that they did. But we're only working to the criteria we're given. We're all medical professionals. We're not out to hurt people, not out to harm people.
Right.
I'm quite sick of being demonised.
Okay, I got you, Suzanne. Thank you very much indeed. Not her real name. Sick of being demonised. She is an assessor. We've got somebody here who is an amputee and claims disability benefits. Trevor Jones in Crookhorn, Hampshire. Hello, Trevor.
Hello, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm well. Now, we've already had one call from an amputee who said he has to keep proving that he's an amputee, and I'm just thinking, is that your situation as well?
Yes. I was amputated in the leg taken off in January 2016, February, and I phoned them to say my leg's come off, etc., etc., and I had to be reassessed for my PIP. Even though I've told them that the leg's come off, I still have to be reassessed. They dropped me from enhanced rate to standard rate.
Yeah.
And then I had to reacclaim again. It had to go to tribunal for them to give me the award for enhanced rate, so you can claim your car and other bits and pieces. And in the report, the lady said, I can walk 50 metres in my wheelchair.
Yeah.
I'd love to know how you can do that, but
I've no idea.
Yeah, I'd love to know myself. But it's just, it's so sad that we have to do it all the time. It's sad enough your doctor telling you you've got to lose your leg. Then it's sad that you can't ever walk again, because I've been told that due to arthritic hips and the hip movement and the stump and this, that and the other, I'm never going to walk again. So you'd feel like jumping off a bridge, and then you get this, that you've got to reapply to say that you're disabled when it's blatant in front of them. And the lady that assessed me said, "Oh, well, I can see you're disabled, Mr. Jones. I'm going to tell them to give you ongoing." And when I got the report, it was a total load of rubbish.
Thank you. Sorry to hear that, Trevor. Lee Richardson in York says, I feel so angry. I've lost 6 friends from benefit sanctions. I went through 7 assessments myself. It's like being interrogated. I had my appendix out. I walked from hospital to the benefits meeting the next day, and I still failed. Maybe because you'd walked. I don't know how they're judging this stuff. Joyce in St Albans says, my son-in-law is a nurse and he took a job with one of these assessment firms and it nearly killed him. The system is set up to fail people. He was seeing claimants who genuinely needed the full benefit, but because they couldn't answer the questions correctly, they lost their money. You just think there must, I don't know, when they say, where did you park your car? You're thinking, what answer do they want from that? I mean, what are they actually looking for when they say that? How far have you walked to get here? I don't know. Sue Montgomery in Whitstable says, my partner Trevor Greenslade has Parkinson's. My sympathies with you. I know all about that. A year ago, he was assessed in just 50 minutes by a non-professional who concluded he wasn't entitled to the full benefits. His amount was reduced by about £300 a month. We appealed and have heard nothing since. We don't know what's going on. Sorry to hear that, Sue. David King is in Milton Keynes and says, I am 61. I've been working since I was 14. I've never claimed a penny in benefits. I've recently had ill health, though, including angina, and I went to claim PIP. And after an hour of filling in forms and answering questions, I got a letter 8 weeks later saying, sorry, you're not eligible. There was no clear reason why. The system is a joke. Barry Hartleybury in Wakefield says, in 2017, I was diagnosed with cancer of the neck. I was in hospital and being fed through a tube, but they still wanted to interview me because I'd been out of work, and the only benefits I then received was statutory sick pay. Thank you, Barry. Mark Longman in Shaftesbury says, I work in the NHS in London, and I recently saw a patient who's severely disabled. He lost 3 of his 5 benefits on the basis that he was judged to be fit and able to work. I then had to deal with a suicidal patient coming up for their PIP assessment. Her consultant wrote a letter to explain her situation, but that wasn't good enough for them. They said, we need one from the GP as well, and they now charge her £100 to write the letter. Thanks again to Frances Ryan, who is a wheelchair user herself, but, you know, this is for her much bigger than that. She's been talking about people she's spoken to with really serious disabilities who have to keep proving that they are actually disabled. It's not about benefit cheats now, it's about the people who are entitled who can't get it.